I've always considered the original Xbox to be the closest thing we ever got to the Dreamcast 2. From elements of the console's architecture to extremely similar controller designs, all the way down to Sega of America's then president Peter Moore literally joining Microsoft. I mean, the Xbox was originally pitched to be backwards compatible with Dreamcast games. Can you imagine? When Sega went third party in 2001, they ended up establishing a partnership with Microsoft to help them launch the Xbox with a stronger presence in Japan, something that is still very difficult for them to this day. If you ever want to talk about something being small, just look at those Japanese Xbox One sales figures. Woof! This collaborative effort would lead to a large amount of, to this day, exclusive games on the original Xbox, a lot of which are pretty awesome. Sega would begin flexing its powers as a publisher and developer, starting with Billy Gates' brand new video game machine, and at the time, I was pissed. But that's just because the Dreamcast died so the box could thrive. Rest in peace. Sega making the decision to go full steam ahead with Microsoft makes a lot of sense, considering the fact that they both focused on getting console gaming online. Sega's ill-fated SegaNet was a great start for online gaming, but it was very basic, difficult to use, and you were very likely to piss off family members by hogging the phone line. It was also a place where Fred Durst was likely going to kick your ass. Xbox Live was the successor to this, and a lot of the games I'm going to be talking about had online capabilities. Obviously, I can't talk about that anymore. So yeah, video games.
Games are now online, unleashing the ultimate horror, your fellow Americans.
So yo, it's Austin, and today on Life After Dream, we're going to be talking about Sega's partnership with Microsoft for Sega on the Xbox. The GameCube side of things was pretty short in comparison, but the Xbox has a ton of weird exclusives. Once again, we're going to be focusing just on the exclusives, because I am going to be doing a video dedicated to all the multiplats they did back in the day, because someone needs to talk about Spartan Total Warrior, and it's probably me.
The Xbox did get a few ports worth mentioning though, most notably the US-only version of Shenmue 2 until the collection in 2018. This actually came with a DVD containing the entire first game spliced together as Shenmue the movie. Still to this day, I've never played the second game beyond like the first hour, so I can't say too much on that, but I do hear that the third game is soul-shattering and will ruin your life. Most every Sega-made Xbox game would come out overseas with the exception of Rent-A-Hero No. 1, a port of an also unreleased Dreamcast game. Surprisingly, this one actually had an English prototype that was leaked on the internet a couple years ago. It's like a combination RPG and beat 'em up like Shenmue, except one where you play as a big loser, and it's amazing. Good old Sega Sanshiro taught me how to beat up my dad. 10 out of 10. Also available was the best console version of Phantasy Star Online episodes 1 and 2. Unfortunately, this isn't easily playable anymore unless you can download an Xbox Live profile onto your hard drive, but it looked sharp, ran sharp, and had well-performing split-screen multiplayer, just like any old multiplat on the Xbox. 480p in 2002, it's more likely than you think.
So here we are, list of exclusives in my hand, and I think that we need to start at the very beginning with the first two that got released, Gun Valkyrie and Jet Set Radio.
I always forget about Gun Valkyrie. In my head, I always mix it up with Bullet Witch, but that's Caveat, and this here is Smilebit. Formed in the middle years of the Dreamcast, Smilebit was a division of Sega that made mostly sports games and Typing of the Dead, a 10 out of 10 for me only. Also some Jet Set Radio game, but for this story, we move forward to the Xbox. Unable to get exclusives ready for the American launch, Sega had Smilebit take a few games that were already in development for the Dreamcast and slap them together to get ready for the European and Japanese launches. The first of the two, Gun Valkyrie, also known as the game with the butt hanging out. Nice. So get this, Gun Valkyrie takes place in the year 1906. That's our 1906. But one where the evil British were never defeated in any of those historical wars. They slowly took over the entire planet. Queen Elizabeth was probably in her mid-40s, and also Halley's Comet brought a bunch of cool and crazy space alien tech that allowed them to take colonialization to space. There, an Irish-British and Japanese-British duo become the Gun Valkyries, destined to fight giant space bugs without the use of aiming sensitivity sliders. She cute though. Gun Valkyrie is a really weird title. It might not have sold very well at the time, but critics and myself really enjoyed the unique arcadey shooting. Even though Gun Valkyrie is pretty much just early 2000s drum and bass rave jank, it's pretty fun to fly around and shoot zombies in. That jank though probably comes from a design choice after the Dreamcast perished. Originally, this was gonna have a unique controller combination where you would fly and jet around using one hand on a Dreamcast controller while shooting at bugs on the screen using a light gun. Obviously, this things changed for the Xbox, where all of that got thrown onto the right analog stick. You can tell because the aiming feels really loose at times, but at least jetting around is great. Unfortunately, just like 90% of every Sega original IP, this would be the last time we'd ever see Gun Valkyrie. Sega were arcade masters back in the day, so they were great at making that type of action game that wouldn't necessarily leave much of an impression, but was fun. Gun Valkyrie was exactly that.
Speaking of IPs that Sega refuses to do anything with, let's talk about Jet Set Radio Future.
I'm not sure why the last time we saw Jet Set Radio was 18 years ago, but here we are. You'd think that Sega, the masters of porting anything with slight notoriety to every console ever, would be on top of this, but they like to pretend their 3D stuff doesn't exist for some reason. I don't, however, and that's why I look at games like Dynamite Cop and Jet Set Radio! For those who aren't aware, Jet Set is a combination of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and vandalism. You skate around doing sick tricks, avoiding the cops, spraying graffiti with your gang sign over other people's graffiti with their gang sign, and forgetting that the soundtrack has a bad word in it. It's also very good. They quickly made a sequel to it to have an early Xbox exclusive, and of course, it's fantastic. Jet Set Radio Future came out in early 2002 and was more of the same on a new console, if you could reach the stick anyway. I don't know anyone with Xbox huge Duke compatible hands. Jet Set Radio Future has one of the best soundtracks ever. The gameplay loop is simple but satisfying. It's close to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but far away enough to make it distinct and memorable. It's a time capsule of early 2000s Japanese hip-hop culture that holds up today, and any other opinions are invalid. Aight.
But what happens if you turn this to the side? Oh!
Anyone who bought an Xbox probably has one of those two pack-in game bundles. There was the Star Wars Clone Wars and Tetris Worlds one, which is one I had, and before that there was Jet Set packed in with Sega GT 2002. There's a lot of these Sega GT racing games which were direct competition to Sony's Gran Turismo, and they're all cargo burr. It's a no Forza Lego.
Speaking of cars that go burr, from the developer of last video's Amazing Island would be the third installment in a short-lived but much-loved franchise that doesn't get any love these days, Crazy Taxi. There's apparently 3 of these. There's more than 3, actually.
Well, considering Crazy Taxi is just maps from the previous 2 games smashed together with a new one, I'm not sure why. Taking a hint from High Rollers in the title, 3 takes us into a fictionalized version of Las Vegas known as the Glitter Oasis. Unfortunately, we don't get to drop off elderly passengers at the Piccadilly or anything, but I mean, it's Crazy Taxi. You drive as fast as possible to the Offspring or Bad Religion and hope you do enough sit close calls to get that extra tip money. This collection has a bunch of mini games thrown into the mix though, so when you aren't working an honest job, you can launch your taxi off the side of a cliff. 4 points. Just like real life. 3 was originally in the works to become Crazy Taxi Next, which would take advantage of Xbox Live and go online. Imagine transporting random folks back and forth from Burger King and HMV with and against your friends online, in a big open world with a day and night cycle. But then you realize it's 2003, True Fantasy Live Online is gonna get canceled, and there's no way that's gonna happen. So instead we just get a new map and a quick port, but still, Crazy Taxi. No complaints here. Unfortunately, this would be the last full original Crazy Taxi game that would be released. There's a few free-to-play mobile games and one last PSP one we'll be talking about in a future video, but the franchise is kind of just ported these days. Not even these days, it's been like 10 years since it got digitally released. But unfortunately, the content from High Rollers and Even 2 never left the Xbox, so that only on Xbox logo on the cover remains true.
Crazy Taxi 3 is only the first of the 3 Xbox 3s. There's 2 more games that would have their 3rd installment that would come out on the Xbox, one of which might be extremely cursed. But first, House of the Dead 3.
If you've never experienced a House of the Dead game, you aren't living.
How could anyone do this?
Sega's campy horror light gun franchise is something that I'll play any day of the week, and the original version of it on the thick Xbox was good. This would eventually get ported to PS3's digital storefront like 10 years later, but this was more than playable. Now there's only 3 light gun compatible games on the original Xbox. This, the Silent Scope Collection, and Starsky and Hutch's actually rad multiplayer, but House of the Dead 3 takes the cake. Unfortunately, I don't have a CRT television, nor do most people in the year 2020, but the built-in aiming reticle more than works and is still a decent experience. Now, like House of the Dead, or any light gun game for that matter, it was destroyed critically. No one really cares about or talks about them, and they're usually extremely short, but if you dig that light gun game life, then, well, you can't go wrong. Plus, this one has two major selling points: A, an unlockable House of the Dead 2, but more importantly, a behind the scenes of Uwe Boll's House of the Dead movie. Hell yeah.
It's House of the Dead. It's fine. It's cringe, but good cringe. The kind of cringe you want in your life. Definitely nowhere near the level of the next game we're going to be talking about, ToeJam and Earl 3, Mission to Mars.
As much as I would consider myself a complete sucker for anything Sega, especially in the 80s to 2000s, I don't think I ever considered myself a ToeJam and Earl fan. The original is this absolutely absurd proto-roguelite that ran at a snail's pace and felt more like a fever dream than a thing that you would pay money for. It's good? Question mark? I don't know. The sequel, Panic at Funkotron, was a game I threw in my top 10 Sega Genesis games because I actually did have a lot of fond memories of it. The gameplay mechanics they were going for worked better as a co-op 2D platformer where each of the levels allowed you to take your time exploring. So when it came time for the Toad and Earl to enter the third dimension, they quickly entered a long gestation period of development hell. After Panic, the rights for the characters got tossed around, they flirted with different consoles, publishers, voice actors, standards and practices, potentially extremely racist imagery, and eventually decided on becoming a first-year exclusive title for the original Xbox. Was it worth the 9-year wait? Let's find out.
You the one who got me out here, and now you're gonna make us late. ToeJam, what the hell are you doing?
Nothing. Just filming some flowers.
You better be filming flowers. I'm not gonna tell you again, ToeJam. You better watch where you point that camera.
You know, I played a lot of Panic at Funkotron, but I think I missed the part where they turned ToeJam into a sex pervert. Also the part where funk meant 2000s hip-hop stereotype. No means no, ToeJam.
Greatest rapper around, the DJ TJ.
Let's cancel his ass. So just like the original, ToeJam and Earl 3, Mission to Earth puts a lot of emphasis on presents. You'll open up a box which will give you a mystery effect. It could be food, it could be invincibility, it could be giant springy shoes. You go around each level convincing people to give you money, asking for candy door to door, all in an effort to spread the good word of funk. How this is helping? I'm not sure, especially when you're doing this. Beyond the occasional cringe and pervy and cringy pervy moments, ToeJam and Earl 3 is at its core a run-of-the-mill 2000s 3D platformer, one with extremely specific American stereotypes placed on goofy alien characters with text that is nigh impossible to read even at 480p. You get to play as Toad, Earl, and newcomer Letitia, but all of them play virtually the same. Like the originals, there's a co-op mode that does a good thing with the split screen feature, but there's better games you could be playing. I'm not sure that there's anyone out there with a friend 100% down to play through the entirety of this, let alone all of the Arnold Schwarzenegger Xbox Live levels.
Why don't you download, then come back here to watch me pump iron?
I just don't know who this is for. It's too different from the other two ToeJam games. The gameplay loop is repetitive and uninteresting. The visuals, while inspired, are tough to look at for a long period of time, and I can't stop cringing.
Damn, you fine, girl.
Go Earl!
And that was the last we saw of ToeJam and Earl until 2019. I backed this on Kickstarter and I still haven't played it. I got busy. Sorry, Greg. ToeJam wasn't the only game Sega published from an outside developer though. In the States, we would get the duology of From Software games, Atogi Myth of Demons and Atogi II Immortal Warriors. These days, everyone knows FromSoft for their Soulsborne Hero games, but before that, it was mostly Armored Core, various other mecha games, and a bunch of weird stuff no one seems to talk about. Evergrace sucks. Atogi came at us during FromSoft's speed era, where they were pumping out 6 or 8 games a year, just about all of them in the middle of the road. However, something about Atogi stood out above a lot of these titles. Once Devil May Cry came around and reinvented 3D action combat for the better, tons of other developers would try to do the same thing, so Atogi Myth of Demons rolls out a year later and tried to give us something a little bit closer to that. Except instead of flashy style and guns, we would get something floatier with a ridiculous amount of destructible backgrounds. Like, seriously, entire arenas can be destroyed. It's Red Faction with eerie, atmospheric FromSoft noises. You play as Raiko Minamoto, very loosely based on the legend of Minamoto no Yorimitsu, who was unable to execute his own father, which then somehow led to a portal connecting the real and demonic worlds to open, leading to an invasion and full-on chaos. Should've just killed your dad, dude. Raiko goes level to level, earning different weapons, slaying hundreds of demons, and generally having a good time. Unless this guy talks.
None shall pass! None shall pass! None shall pass!
You can tell this game was being developed pre-Ninja Gaiden or even Devil May Cry. Rather than giving us a big open area or even multi-tiered levels to explore, most of Atogi's environments are small battle arenas where you just fight waves of dudes. It's a pretty standard, janky action affair, just with a little bit of that From Software atmosphere. Although back in the day, apparently FromSoft partnered up with Britney Spears to help sell the game in Xboxes in Japan. And I really don't know what to say about that.
It's Britney, bitch.
And then literally 1 year later, they'd come back with Atogi II. This is basically the same cover.
Generally, Atogi 1 was a pretty hard sell. It was a very Japanese game on a very Western console that sold like 89 units in Japan. Atogi 2 was more of the same, but in my opinion, a pretty significant improvement over the original. It's like, yeah, the demons are back. You really should have just killed your dad. But this time, we've got friends. That's right, no sleep for you, Johnny McOtogi man. Rather than Raiko having a ton of weapons, this time they're spread out throughout your entire party. Otogi just offers so much more variety in the gameplay, and it ends up being one of the more interesting games on the original Xbox. Apparently, that's controversial though, because a lot of people are like, ew, Otogi 2, and that's something I'll never understand. I'd never say that these two games are up there with something like Ninja Gaiden, considering that's an absolute classic that will stand the test of time for years to come, but Atogi 1 and 2 offers something unique that I think only From Software could offer. Also, it's—
None shall pass!
Stop! So far, Sega's output on the Xbox has ranged from okay to pretty good, so let's change that with Iron Phoenix.
Whew boy. Iron Phoenix was an online multiplayer deathmatch style game using that Xbox Live to its full advantage. However, what they didn't tell you as you looked at the back of the box to see the award for most innovative game of E3 was that it ran at a solid 5 frames a second. Now imagine that on 2005 Xbox Live, dial-up tier connections and all of the foul, horrible words you can imagine, and it's no wonder that nobody talks about Iron Phoenix. It's even harder to believe that Sega published this bad boy. Beyond the frame rate, it just feels clunky, and if you get into the 1v1 fighting style against another player, it doesn't matter because other players can just smack you out of it. How very fair of thou. Who cares?
Let's talk about dragons!
When people talk about the big Xbox exclusives, Panzer Dragoon Orta is usually at the forefront. The Panzer Dragoon series is one of Sega's greatest cult hit factories that refuses to be purchased by consumers over decades of trying. It's Sega's answer to Star Fox, a cool 3D rail shooter with an extremely unique world. Almost every release has a high resale value, with the JRPG spin-off Panzer Dragoon Saga being one of the pinnacles of video game collecting. Also, considering it has now reached the $1,000 marker, I think it's time for a port. Come on. Panzer Dragoon Orta was the third Smilebit release around the Xbox's launch, and this game is a genuine gem. It was already a gorgeous, beautifully performing and sounding experience, but now that it's gotten that 1080p HD enhancement on the Xbox One, playing Orta is a treat. It looks and runs better than the 1.0 of the remake. Come on. I think Sega and Microsoft were both leaning on this selling a bit better to attract more Japanese customers to the console, but unfortunately it didn't do that. How a game this fantastic, critically acclaimed, and a genuine fun time to play couldn't manage enough sales is beyond me, but I suppose Panzer Dragoon truly is a cursed franchise.
There's not too much to say about Orta that can't be experienced in its short run time, but the complicated story, the fantastic rail shooting, the dragon flying gameplay is all something that Drakengard really should have looked at. Stupid Drakengard. But yeah, speaking of all-time classics, let's talk about one of my favorite games in the entire video and on the console, Outrun II.
You know Sega has faith in something when they name the 10th entry in the Outrun series Outrun II. That is, of course, a sequel to Outrun 2019, which, well, I guess 2019 kinda looked like this. For those of you whose first video game was Wii Sports, Outrun is a series of arcade racers that Sega made which had a simple goal: drive with your babe to the end. Each level had varying difficulties and locations you could pick from at the end of it. Go left for easy mode, go right for hard mode. It's a simple game with a banging soundtrack, and it's hard to beat that simplicity. However, Outrun 2 on the Xbox took that concept, didn't mess with it, gave it big shiny graphics, multiple 2000s era babes to take on a ride, and well, it's kind of perfect. While While it hit arcades prior to the Xbox, the console version had Sumo Digital working on it, and they really fleshed this thing the hell out. It doesn't go for anything realistic, just fast and furious drifting, high-speed driving, and of course your choice of one of the 7 tracks in the game, with a couple unlockables, and it's all real good. Sumo's involvement would lead to the absolutely fantastic Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, but that would come out on the PlayStation 2, PSP, Xbox, and PC, so we'll see you in a future video.
And so we've come to the end of the line for the Sega Xbox collaboration. Now, most of the games were pretty good, a couple were absolute trash, but there's only one game in this video that you could label as Fred Durst core, and that's Spike Out Battle Street. Spike Out Battle Street! Yeah!
Spike Out's existence is a baffling one, but one that has its painfully obvious roots in Toshihiro Nagaoshi of Yakuza and Monkey Ball fame. It's a 3D beat-em-up that hit arcades and was really reminiscent of the Dynamite Deca series of games, except instead of being a cop, you're some guy, the gang leader, I guess. This is cool because Sega didn't really have any other franchises that were side-scrolling beat-em-ups that took place on the angry streets. So a few years later, and with this neato franchise in their pocket, Sega would task themselves with creating one more Xbox exclusive targeting the Western audience, and Spike Out Battle Street was born. 10 years after the original conflict, things have broke out again, and it's up to Spike Jr. to lead the way. This is peak character design.
Oh, what's up?
It's been so long, Junior.
But is it good? Is it bad? The answer to that is up for debate. It's a totally serviceable 3D beat 'em up, but it's also a totally janky quarter muncher that isn't able to eat quarter. When you game over 2 times, it's like, hey, you wanna play this cool baby mode? But that mode is still kinda hard, so it's like, if there was a game that could have made continuous microtransactions back in the day, this was it. I hope that never happens. The game is overall just easier in co-op due to the way that the enemies function. Cause you know, there's not really any invincibility frames here, so you'll just get juggled into another dimension where Limp Bizkit gets the credit they deserve. Also, Randy Savage is here. Spike Out Battle Street's existence is a strange one, and definitely a sign that Sega was mostly interested in testing that online Xbox Live audience. But since this came out in 2005, I don't think they hit that market. Especially not with the 360 already on the horizon. Plus, people were just playing Wii with their grandma. But you know what the 360 didn't have? These walk cycles, these ridiculous outfits, the all-time classic Japanese take on what America is like, and the over-the-top announcers.
Break the gate.
And I wouldn't want it any other way. Spike Out Battle Street is one of those forgotten well, it's not really a gem. It's a game. Spike Out Battle Street is a game on the Xbox by Sega. And, well, that's all for today. With the exception of the multiplats and 2K sports games, we've conquered everything there is to conquer on the Xbox. As for what's next, I want to ask you guys. We've done GameCube, we just finished Xbox. What else do you want to see Sega on? We got, N-Gage. Why did I start with N-Gage? Let me know in the comments. Join me next time for more Dark Souls clones.
Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Plasma Phoenix, Nitron, Legend Gary, Karen Arter, Kevin Zanowski, Josh Garbage Lord, Jordy McCaffrey, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Jeffrey Narvaez, J. Roos, Flaming Fighter, Eli Shane Staffenecker, David Molnar, Donald Dowdy, D.A. Stevens, Cliff Pro, Christopher Olivia, Chris Shelton, and Brandon Howell. Thank you guys so much for your generous support. Hey, there's part 2. Look, we did a part 2 in record time. Stay tuned next week. Seriously, next week. It's coming. Also, I'm gonna be streaming Star Ocean 4 for no reason. Go to Twitch. Bye.